Galactic Council Astonished when Earth Fights Back. Part 5. The New Order. 3 weeks after the battle, Ambassador Yuna returned to the Galactic Council. She wore the same simple dark suit she had worn the first time. She carried no weapons, no guards, and no army behind her. She arrived on a single transport ship, the same one that had brought her before. From the outside, nothing about her had changed. But everything else had. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was full, just as it had been during her first visit. 300 civilizations filled the seats that rose in every direction. The same strange mixture of alien bodies and alien sounds filled the air. The same massive jellyfish speaker floated in the center, glowing softly. But the atmosphere was completely different. The last time Yuna had stood on this floor, the hall had been filled with arrogance and laughter. Now it was filled with silence. The kind of silence that comes after something has broken, and no one knows how to fix it. Yuna walked to the center of the floor. Her footsteps echoed just as they had before. She stopped, looked up at the thousands of faces staring down at her, and waited. The speaker announced her presence. The voice was the same, booming and translated into every language, but there was something different in its tone. Before, it had sounded bored, as if introducing a minor curiosity before the real business of the day. Now it sounded careful. The way someone speaks when they are standing near something they have just realized is dangerous. Yuna bowed. Then she began to speak. She did not talk about the battle. She did not list the number of ships destroyed or the damage inflicted. She did not boast or threaten or demand revenge. She had discussed this with General Tejo before leaving Earth, and they had agreed that victory meant nothing if it was used to become the very thing they had fought against. Instead, she talked about Earth. She told them about her planet. She said it was a small world, covered mostly in water, orbiting an ordinary star in an unremarkable part of the galaxy. She said that its people had a short history compared to most of the civilizations in the hall. She said that humans had spent most of that history making mistakes. They had fought wars over pieces of land that could barely feed a village. They had enslaved each other over the color of their skin. They had poisoned their own air and water in the pursuit of comfort. They had built weapons capable of destroying their entire world, and had come close to using them more than once. The hall listened in silence. Others leaned forward, curious despite themselves. Yuna continued. She said that despite all of this, humans had also done something remarkable. They had learned. Slowly, painfully, and imperfectly, they had learned. They had built hospitals and schools. They had written music that could make a person cry without understanding a single word. They had looked up at the stars and felt not fear, but wonder. They had reached out into the darkness, not because they wanted to conquer it, but because they wanted to understand it. She said that when the Council's message arrived, humanity could have panicked, it could have surrendered, it could have turned on itself, the way it had so many times before, but it did not. For the first time in its history, humanity had stood together. Every nation, every culture, every language, united against a common threat. And Yuna said that this, more than the railguns or the drones or the warships, was the real weapon that had saved Earth. She paused and let the silence settle over the hall. Then she reached into her bag and placed a small device on the floor in front of her. It projected a holographic document into the air, written in every language of the Council simultaneously. It was Earth's proposal. She said that Earth was not interested in conquest. Humanity had enough experience with empires to know that they always collapsed under their own weight. She said that Earth was not interested in revenge. The Volari had attacked, and Earth had defended itself. And as far as humanity was concerned, that chapter was closed. What Earth wanted was simple. It wanted a seat at the table. It wanted to be treated as an equal member of the galactic community. It wanted free trade between Earth and any civilization willing to engage in honest commerce. It wanted access to knowledge, science, and culture. And in return, it offered the same. But there was one more condition. Una said that Earth proposed a new law for the Council. No civilization would ever again be classified as a resource. No world would ever again be given an ultimatum to surrender or die. Every species, no matter how young or how small, would be treated as sovereign. If the Council wanted to be a community, it had to start acting like one. The hall was completely still. Then, from the back of the room, a delegate from one of the smaller civilizations began to tap their appendage against the arm of their seat. It was a slow, rhythmic sound. Another delegate joined in, then another, and another. The tapping spread through the hall like rain beginning to fall, soft at first, and then building into something that filled the entire chamber. It was applause, not from the powerful species, not from the Volari or the other military empires. It was from the smallest ones, those who had been waiting, those who had been watching. It came from the small civilizations, the ones that had been bullied and threatened and exploited for millennia, the ones that had never had anyone stand up for them before. The speaker called for a vote. The proposal was accepted by an overwhelming majority. The Volari delegation did not vote. They sat in their black metal seats and watched in silence as the galaxy changed around them. After the vote, Una gathered her things and walked toward the exit. The smaller delegates reached out to touch her hand as she passed, a gesture of gratitude in a dozen different alien customs. She accepted each one with a small nod and a quiet word of thanks. At the door, she found Malvek waiting for her. The Volari supreme leader was even taller up close. His 4 arms hung at his sides, and his blue eyes glowed faintly in the dim light of the corridor. He looked at her for a long time, without speaking. Then he asked her a question. His voice came through the translator as flat and emotionless. But Una had spent enough time in diplomacy to hear the confusion underneath. He asked why. Why had humanity not demanded territory? Why had it not claimed the Volari's conquered systems for itself? Why had it not used its victory to seize power? Any other species would have. Every other species had. That was how the galaxy worked. You fought, you won, and you took everything you could carry. Una looked up at him. She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. She said that there was a saying on Earth that Malvek might not understand yet, but that she hoped he would someday. She said that true strength was not measured by what you could take. It was measured by what you could protect. Earth had not fought to rule the galaxy. Earth had fought so that no one would ever have to kneel again. Not humans, not the Volari's conquered worlds, not anyone. His blue eyes flickered, and for a moment, just a moment, something shifted behind them. It might have been understanding. It might have been the beginning of something that his species had never felt before. Una was not sure. She bowed one last time, turned, and walked away. The transport ship carried her back through the stars, back to the small blue planet that had changed everything. She sat by the window and watched the galaxy pass by, a river of light and darkness stretching out in every direction. Somewhere out there, 300 civilizations were beginning a new chapter in their history. It would not be easy. Old habits did not die quickly, and the galaxy was vast and complicated, and full of beings who did not trust each other. But it was a start. When the ship entered Earth's atmosphere, Una looked down at the planet below. She could see the ocean, blue and endless. She could see the mountains and the rivers and the cities glittering with light. She could see Sol, where she had grown up, where her family still lived, where the old men were probably playing chess in the park right now, without any idea of what had just happened. She smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was real. General Tejo was waiting for her when she landed. He stood on the tarmac, with his hands behind his back, his gray hair ruffled by the wind. Behind him, Captain Jinho, Lieutenant Hana, Engineer Suji, and Dr. Dongwu stood in a line, still wearing the uniforms they had worn during the battle. Tejo asked her how it went. Yuna looked at him, at all of them, at the 5 people who had helped save a world and change a galaxy. She took a deep breath of Earth's air, cool and clean and smelling faintly of rain. She said it went well. She said the galaxy had a lot of growing up to do, but then again, so did humanity. She said it was going to be a long road. Then he almost smiled, which for him was the same as anyone else breaking into tears of joy. He said, "Then let's get started." And they did. The galaxy was never the same again, but then again, it was never supposed to be. Galactic Council astonished when Earth fights back. Part 4, The Reckoning. The battle had been raging for 6 hours, and the Valari Armada was bleeding. 12,000 of their ships were gone. Some had been vaporized by the railgun strikes. Others had been torn apart by Earth's fleet in close combat. Hundreds more drifted powerless through space, their engines dead, their weapons silent, their crews trapped inside metal coffins that were slowly running out of air. The wreckage formed a field of twisted metal and frozen bodies that stretched across thousands of kilometers. But the Valari still had 28,000 ships, and they were starting to reorganize. On the bridge of the Baiko, Captain Jinho studied the tactical display with red-rimmed eyes. He had not slept in over 30 hours. Coffee had stopped working 2 hours ago. His uniform was wrinkled and stained with sweat, and his voice was hoarse from giving orders. But his mind was still sharp, and what his mind was telling him was not good. The initial surprise had been devastating, but surprise only worked once. The Valari commanders were adapting. They had pulled their remaining ships into a tighter formation, protecting their flagship at the center. They had identified the location of the lunar railguns and were keeping their distance. And they were beginning to push back against Earth's fleet, with organized counterattacks that were getting harder to survive. Earth had lost 43 ships. Each one carried a crew of 200 people. Jinho did the math in his head, and then stopped doing the math, because the number made it hard to breathe. He needed a new plan, and he needed it fast. That was when Lieutenant Hana called in. Hana commanded a stealth squadron, 12 small ships equipped with the most advanced cloaking technology Earth had ever developed. The ships were tiny compared to the warships, barely larger than a commercial airplane, and they carried no heavy weapons. What they carried instead was far more dangerous. They carried people who were very good at getting into places they were not supposed to be. Hana had been circling the battle for hours, staying hidden, watching, and waiting. She had been studying the Valari flagship through passive sensors, mapping its shield frequencies and identifying weak points. Now, she had found what she was looking for. She reported to Jinho that the Valari flagship had a gap in its shield coverage. It was small, and it only appeared for a fraction of a second every time the ship rotated on its axis, but it was there. If her squadron could get close enough during that window, they could attach electromagnetic charges directly to the hull. The charges would not destroy the ship, but they would bring down its shields completely. Jinho asked her how close she needed to get. Hana told him the number. It was very close, dangerously close, the kind of close that meant her ships would be inside the flagship's point defense range, where automated weapons would fire at anything that moved. Jinho was quiet for a long time. Then he asked Hana if she could do it. Hana said yes. She did not hesitate. She did not add conditions or qualifications. She just said yes. Jinho gave the order, and then he called Dr. Dongwu. Dongwu was not a soldier. He was a physicist who had spent most of his career in a laboratory, surrounded by equations and circuit boards. He was thin, wore glasses that were always slightly crooked, and had a habit of talking to himself when he was thinking. He was also the creator of the EMP drone swarm, the most sophisticated weapon in Earth's arsenal. The drones were small, about the size of a dinner plate, and each one carried a miniature electromagnetic pulse device. Individually, they were harmless, but Dongwu had designed them to work together, linking their pulses into a cascading wave that could shut down any electronic system within range. He had tested them against Earth's own technology, and they had worked perfectly. He had never tested them against alien technology, but the underlying physics was universal. Electricity was electricity, no matter who built the circuit. Dongwu reported that the drone swarm was ready. 10,000 drones were loaded into launch pods on the lunar surface, waiting for the command. Jinho told him to prepare for launch on his signal. Then the plan went into motion. Jinho ordered his fleet to mount a full frontal assault on the Volari formation. Every ship charged forward, weapons blazing, pushing directly at the center of the enemy line. It was reckless and aggressive, and exactly the kind of thing the Volari expected from a desperate, primitive species. The Volari commanders took the bait. They focused their firepower on the attacking fleet, pouring energy into the fight. While every Volari sensor was pointed forward, Hana's stealth squadron slipped in from behind. The 12 small ships moved through the wreckage field like shadows, using the debris for cover. Hana flew the lead ship herself, her hands steady on the controls, her eyes fixed on the flagship growing larger in her view screen. She counted the seconds between each shield rotation. She mapped the gap. She calculated the approach angle. Then she gave the order, and her squadron accelerated. They crossed the point defense perimeter at full speed. Automated weapons opened fire immediately. Bright flashes of energy filled the space around them. 2 of her ships were hit. They exploded instantly, their crews gone before they could even scream. Hana did not look. She could not afford to look. The magnetic charges deployed, clamping onto the flagship's armor with a sound she could feel through her seat. 8 of her remaining 10 ships did the same, placing charges at precise locations along the hull. Hana pulled away and hit the detonation switch. The charges fired simultaneously. A wave of electromagnetic energy surged across the flagship's hull, overloading its shield generators. The massive energy barrier that had protected the ship flickered, stuttered, and then collapsed entirely. For the first time in the battle, the Volari flagship was exposed. Jinho saw the shields drop on his tactical display. He gave the signal to Dongwu. The lunar launch pods opened, and 10,000 drones streamed into space. They moved in a swarm, flowing like a river of metal toward the Volari formation. The Volari tried to shoot them down, but the drones were too small and too fast. They poured through the gaps in the enemy formation like water through a broken dam. Then they detonated. The EMP cascade hit the Volari fleet like a wave. Ship after ship lost power. Lights went dark. Engines died. Weapons fell silent. The great warships of the most powerful civilization in the galaxy became nothing more than floating metal, drifting helplessly through space. The cascade spread outward from the flagship, jumping from ship to ship through their communication links, turning the Volari's own network into a weapon against them. In less than 10 minutes, 18,000 Volari ships went dark. The remaining ships, those on the outer edge of the formation that the cascade had not reached, broke formation and ran. They jumped to faster-than-light speed and fled in every direction, scattering across the galaxy like frightened animals. On the bridge of the Baiko, Jinho watched them go. The tactical display, which had been filled with red enemy contacts just minutes before, was now mostly empty. The battle was over. The bridge was silent. Nobody cheered. Nobody celebrated. They were too tired, too stunned, and too aware of the cost. 43 ships, over 8,000 people. Jinho would carry those numbers for the rest of his life. Across the galaxy, the Galactic Council watched their sensor feeds in silence. 300 civilizations, some of them millions of years old, sat in their seats and stared at their screens and tried to understand what they had just seen. A species that had been classified as primitive, a species that had been laughed at, a species that had been given 7 rotations to surrender, had just dismantled the most powerful military force in the known galaxy. The hall of the Galactic Council was quiet for a very long time. And on Earth, the sun rose over Seoul. The city woke up. People went to work. Children went to school. The old men set up their chessboards in the park. They still did not know what had happened in the sky above them, but they would. Soon the whole galaxy would know. Humanity had fought back, and it had won. Galactic Council, astonished when Earth fights back. Part 3, The Strike. The Volari Armada dropped out of faster-than-light travel at exactly the moment they had promised. They appeared beyond the orbit of Mars, and for a few seconds, the sky in that part of space turned white with the light of 40,000 ships arriving at once. It was the largest military force ever assembled against a single planet in the history of the Galactic Council. It was a force designed not just to conquer, but to terrify, to remind every species in the galaxy what happened when you said no to the Council. On Earth, it was night in Seoul. The city lights glittered below a clear sky. People were sleeping, eating dinner, watching television. Most of them still did not know what was happening. The world's governments had decided to keep the alien threat a secret to prevent panic. Only a handful of people on the entire planet knew that 40,000 warships had just arrived in their solar system. Captain Jinho was one of them. He sat in the command chair of the warship Baekho, the lead vessel of Earth's first defense fleet. The Baekho was hiding behind the moon, engines silent, running on minimal power to avoid detection. Around him, 200 other Earth warships waited in the same darkness, spread out across the lunar surface like wolves crouching in tall grass. Jinho was 34 years old. He had been recruited into Project Horizon at the age of 22, straight out of the Naval Academy. He had spent 12 years training for a battle that everyone told him might never happen. He had run simulations 1,000 times. He had memorized attack patterns, studied alien ship designs from intercepted transmissions, and practiced maneuvers until he could execute them in his sleep. Now it was real, and his mouth was dry. His communications officer reported that the Volari Armada was moving. They were coming in fast, heading straight for Earth in a standard conquest formation. It was a wide, flat spread designed to surround a planet and cut off all escape routes. It was a formation that had worked against dozens of worlds before. The Volari were not expecting resistance. They were expecting surrender. Jinho opened a channel to all ships. His voice was steady, though his heart was hammering in his chest. He told his crews that this was the moment they had trained for. He told them that every person on Earth was counting on them, even the ones who did not know it yet. He told them to hold their positions and wait for his signal. Then he called the lunar weapons platform. On the dark side of the moon, in a vast network of tunnels and chambers that had been dug in secret over 2 decades, Engineer Suji sat at her console and watched the Armada approach. The railgun platforms were her life's work. She had designed them from the ground up, starting with rough sketches on notebook paper when she was a graduate student, and ending with the most powerful weapons humanity had ever built. Each railgun was the length of a small city. They used electromagnetic force to accelerate tungsten projectiles to a fraction of the speed of light. At that velocity, a single projectile carried more energy than a nuclear bomb, and Suji had built 48 of them. She reported to Jinho that all platforms were charged and ready. Targeting data was locked. The Valari Armada was moving in a tight formation, which meant that the projectiles would pass through multiple ships before losing energy. It was, from a weapons engineering perspective, perfect. Jinho gave the order. Suji pressed the firing command. The moon shook. 48 railguns fired simultaneously. The projectiles left the barrels at such speed that they were invisible to the naked eye. They crossed the distance between the moon and the Armada in seconds. And when they hit, the result was beyond anything even Suji had calculated. The first volley struck the center of the Valari formation. Each projectile punched through ship after ship, turning advanced alien warships into expanding clouds of metal and fire. The kinetic energy released was so enormous that nearby ships were knocked off course by the shockwaves alone. Secondary explosions rippled through the formation as damaged ships lost containment on their power cores and detonated. 6,000 ships were destroyed in 90 seconds. The Armada stopped moving. For a long moment, nothing happened. The remaining 34,000 ships simply hung in space, surrounded by the burning wreckage of their comrades. They did not fire back. They did not advance. They did not retreat. They just stopped. On the Valari flagship, the commanders stared at their screens in disbelief. Their sensors showed them what had happened, but their minds refused to accept it. No primitive world had ever fired back. No species classified as Resource Category 7 had ever possessed weapons capable of damaging a Valari warship, let alone destroying 6,000 of them in a single strike. And yet the wreckage floating outside their windows told a different story. Jinho did not give them time to recover. He gave the second order, and Earth's hidden fleet launched from behind the moon. 200 warships surged forward, engines blazing, weapons hot. They were smaller than the Valari ships and fewer in number, but they were fast and they were angry. Jinho had designed the attack pattern himself. It was based on an ancient naval tactic called crossing the T, adapted for three-dimensional space combat. The Earth ships swept across the front of the Valari formation in a long arc, firing everything they had at the disorganized enemy. Missiles streaked across the void. Energy weapons carved bright lines through the darkness. Point defense guns created walls of metal that shredded anything that tried to get close. The Earth ships moved with a coordination that surprised even Jinho. 12 years of training showed in every maneuver, every shot, every split-second decision. The Valari finally began to fight back. Their ships were powerful, and their weapons were advanced. Bright beams of energy lanced out from the Armada, and some of them found their targets. Earth ships exploded. Crews died. Jinho watched the casualty reports scrolling across his screen and forced himself to keep giving orders. But the damage had been done. The first strike had broken the Armada's formation, and Jinho's fleet was exploiting every gap. Small squadrons of Earth ships darted between the larger Valari vessels, striking at their engines and weapon systems before pulling away. It was like watching a pack of wolves bringing down animals 10 times their size. Across the galaxy, the Galactic Council watched the battle through long-range sensors. Every species with the technology to observe had their screens locked on the fight. They had expected to see a quick, brutal conquest. Instead, they were watching something they had never seen before. A primitive world was fighting back, and it was winning. Back on the moon, Suji watched the battle data flowing across her screens. The railguns were recharging for a second volley. She ran the numbers in her head. The first strike had exceeded all projections. The Armada was in chaos. If the second volley was timed correctly, they could break the Valari formation entirely. She reported to Jinho. He told her to fire when ready. Suji smiled. It was a small, tired smile. The smile of a woman who had spent 20 years building something and was finally watching it do exactly what it was supposed to do. The railguns hummed as they charged. The battle raged on, and somewhere on Earth, in a city called Seoul, a child looked up at the night sky and saw a faint flash of light between the stars. She tugged her mother's hand and pointed. Her mother looked up, saw nothing unusual, and told her it was probably a satellite. It was not a satellite. It was the future of humanity, being written in fire and steel among the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same. Galactic Council astonished when Earth fights back. H1, Part 2, The Mockery. The Galactic Council's meeting hall was the largest structure ever built by any living species. It floated in the empty space between two dead stars, a massive ring of metal and light that could be seen from 3 star systems away. Inside, it held representatives from over 300 civilizations. Some of them were ancient beyond human understanding. Some of them had been traveling between stars when Earth was still a ball of molten rock. And all of them believed without any doubt that they were superior to the small, noisy creatures from the 3rd planet. And Yuna arrived alone. That was the first thing that surprised them. The council had expected a full delegation. They had expected frightened leaders begging for mercy, or perhaps confused politicians trying to negotiate. Instead, they got one woman in a simple dark suit, standing at the entrance of the Great Hall, with her hands folded in front of her, looking up at the thousands of alien faces, staring down at her, like she had walked into a slightly large conference room. The hall was shaped like a bowl, with rows of seats rising up on every side. Each section belonged to a different species. Some seats held creatures that looked like tall insects, with shimmering wings. Others held beings made of what appeared to be living stone. Some were surrounded by tanks of liquid, and others floated in the air without any visible support. The air smelled strange, a mixture of chemicals and something sweet that Yuna could not identify. At the very top of the hall, in a section made of polished black metal, sat the Valari delegation. The Valari were the most powerful species in the council. They were tall, thin, and pale, with 4 arms and eyes that glowed faintly blue. They had conquered over 60 star systems and controlled the largest military fleet in the known galaxy. Their supreme leader, a being called Mulvek, looked down at Yuna with an expression that might have been amusement or might have been disgust. It was hard to tell with a face that had no mouth. A booming voice filled the hall. It came from everywhere at once, translated into every language simultaneously. The voice belonged to the council's speaker, a massive creature that looked like a floating jellyfish made of light. The speaker announced that the representative of Earth had arrived to deliver her planet's response to the council's demand. The hall fell silent. Every eye, every sensor, every organ of perception turned toward the small human woman standing alone on the floor below. Yuna stepped forward. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. She had practiced this speech 100 times. She had written it, rewritten it, thrown it away, and written it again. General Tejo had told her to keep it short. He had said that long speeches were for people who were afraid. Yuna was afraid, but she had no intention of showing it. She bowed once, slowly and deliberately. It was a gesture of respect, not submission, and the difference mattered to her, even if no one else in the room understood it. Then she spoke. She thanked the council for the invitation. She said that the people of Earth had received the council's message and had given it careful consideration. She said that Earth was a small world, and that its people were young compared to the great civilizations assembled in this hall. She acknowledged that humanity had much to learn from the galaxy. The delegates shifted in their seats. Some of them nodded. This was going the way they expected. The primitive species was going to surrender. It always happened this way. Then Yuna's voice changed. It became harder, quieter, more dangerous. She said that the people of Earth had a long memory. She said that throughout their history, stronger nations had demanded that weaker ones kneel. Empires had risen and told the small and the poor to hand over everything they had or be destroyed. And every single time, someone had stood up and said no. She said that Earth respectfully declined the Council's demand. The silence that followed was absolute. It was so complete that Yuna could hear her own heartbeat. Then the laughter started. It began with the Volari delegation. Molvek's 4 hands slapped together in what Yuna assumed was their version of clapping, and a strange, high-pitched sound came from the communicator embedded in his chest. The laughter spread like a wave across the hall. Species that had never agreed on anything in 10,000 years suddenly found common ground in their amusement at the tiny human who had just told them no. The speaker let the laughter continue for a while before restoring order. Then Molvek stood and addressed the hall directly. He spoke about Earth the way a person might speak about an insect that had landed on their food. He called humans dust dwellers. He said they were barely more than animals. He said that their planet was unremarkable. Their technology was primitive, and their military was laughable. He said that the Volari Armada alone had 40,000 warships, any one of which could reduce Earth's surface to glass in minutes. He looked directly at Yuna and told her that the Council would give Earth 7 more rotations to reconsider. He said that after 7 rotations, the Armada would arrive, and there would be no more talking. Yuna listened to all of this without moving. Her face showed nothing. When Molvek finished, the hall erupted in noise again. Delegates shouted their approval. Some banged on their seats. Others made sounds that Yuna could not interpret, but understood perfectly well. She waited until the noise died down. Then she spoke one last time. She said that Earth would be waiting. She bowed again, turned around, and walked out of the hall. Her footsteps echoed behind her, steady and unhurried. She did not look back. On the transport ship home, Yuna sat alone in the small cabin and finally allowed her hands to shake. She pressed them together and closed her eyes. She thought about the city she had left behind. She thought about the people walking to work, the children in school, the old men playing chess in the park. She thought about all the things that would be lost if she had made the wrong choice. Then she opened her eyes, picked up her communicator, and called General Tejo. She told him that the Council had laughed. She told him about the 40,000 ships. She told him about the 7 rotations. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then Tejo said, "Good, let them laugh." He told her that the lunar railguns were online, the fleet was in position, the soldiers were ready. He said that in 7 rotations, the galaxy was going to learn something important about humanity. Yuna asked him what that was. Tejo's voice was calm and steady when he answered. He said that the galaxy was going to learn that the most dangerous creature in the universe was not the one with the biggest fleet or the most advanced technology. It was the one that had been backed into a corner and had decided it was not going to die quietly. Yuna closed her eyes again and took a deep breath. 7 rotations. The clock was ticking, and somewhere in the vast darkness of space, 40,000 warships began to move toward a small blue planet that had just done something no world had ever done before. Galactic Council astonished when Earth fights back. H1, Part 1, The Summons. The signal arrived on a Tuesday morning, and it changed everything. Deep beneath the mountains of Gangwon Province, inside a facility that did not officially exist, a wall of screens flickered to life. The room was cold, filled with the hum of machines that never slept. Dozens of officers sat at their stations, monitoring satellites, deep space probes, and frequencies that most governments did not even know about. This was the United Earth Defense Command, and for 30 years it had been waiting for exactly this moment. A young communications officer named Suji was the first to see it. The signal was not like anything they had received before. It was not random noise from a distant star. It was not a glitch. It was structured, deliberate, and powerful. It cut through every frequency like a knife through paper. Suji's hands trembled slightly as she isolated the signal and ran it through the translation system. The system had been built over 2 decades using fragments of alien languages collected from deep space. Nobody had ever expected it to actually work. But it worked. The message was short. It was not a greeting. It was not an invitation. It was a demand. To the species of the third planet orbiting the yellow star, you have been observed. Your world has been classified as Resource Category 7. You are hereby ordered to surrender all planetary resources, dismantle your military forces, and prepare for full integration into the Galactic Council's resource network. You have 30 planetary rotations to comply. Failure to comply will result in total annihilation. This is not a negotiation. Suji read the message 3 times. Then she picked up the phone and called her commanding officer. Within the hour, the message had reached the highest levels of Earth's leadership. Ambassador Yuna was sitting in her office in Seoul when the call came. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice that never seemed to break, no matter how bad the news was. She had spent 20 years in diplomacy, handling some of the most difficult negotiations on Earth. But nothing had prepared her for this. She read the message on her tablet, set it down, and stared out the window for a long time. The city below moved as it always did. Cars honked, people walked to work, children ran to school. None of them knew that a civilization from across the galaxy had just told them to surrender or die. Yuna picked up her phone and called General Taeho. Taeho was not the kind of man who panicked. He was in his late 50s, built like a wall, with gray hair cut short, and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He had served in the military for over 30 years, and had led the United Earth Defense Command for the last 10. He had spent his entire career preparing for a threat that most people thought was imaginary. When Yuna told him about the message, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Taeho laughed. It was not a nervous laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had been waiting for something his whole life, and had finally seen it arrive. So they finally showed up, he said. Yuna asked him what they should do. Taeho told her to come to the facility. He said there was something she needed to see. 3 hours later, Yuna stood in the deepest level of the mountain facility. The room was enormous, stretching out in every direction like an underground cathedral. And it was filled with things that should not have existed. Taeho walked beside her, his boots echoing on the metal floor. He explained everything as they moved through the room. For 30 years, Earth's governments had been secretly working together on a project called Horizon. It had started when the first alien signals were detected in the early 2000s. At first, no one believed it, but the signals kept coming, and eventually, the world's leaders had to accept the truth. They were not alone, and whatever was out there was not friendly. Project Horizon was humanity's answer. It was a global defense network hidden in plain sight. Railgun platforms had been built on the dark side of the moon, disguised as mining operations. A fleet of warships had been constructed in underground shipyards beneath the ocean floor. New weapons had been developed using principles of physics that the public would not understand for another century. Thousands of soldiers had been trained in secret, preparing for a war that might never come. But now, it had come. Rows upon rows of sleek dark warships sat in their docks, silent and waiting. They were not pretty. They were not elegant. They were built for one purpose, and that purpose was to fight. Each ship carried weapons that could crack an asteroid in half. Each ship was crewed by men and women who had volunteered for a mission they could never talk about. Yuna looked at the ships and then looked at Taeho. She asked him if it would be enough. Taeho did not answer right away. He looked at the fleet, and for a moment His hard face softened. He told her that he did not know. He said that they had no idea how powerful the Galactic Council was. They had no idea how many ships they had, or what kind of weapons they used. Everything Earth had built was based on guesswork and hope. But he also said something else. He said that humanity had one advantage that no alien civilization could understand. Humans had spent their entire history fighting each other. They had fought over land, over food, over ideas, over nothing at all. They had invented new ways to destroy each other, with a creativity that was almost beautiful in its horror. And now, for the first time in history, all of that violence, all of that stubbornness, all of that refusal to give up and die was pointed in the same direction. Yuna nodded slowly. She understood. Tejo gave the order. Project Horizon was activated. Across the planet, in hidden bases and secret facilities, lights turned on and engines roared to life. Soldiers reported to their stations. Pilots climbed into their cockpits. Engineers ran final checks on weapons that had never been fired. And on the surface, the world continued as it always had. People went to work. Children went to school. The sun rose and set. Nobody knew what was coming. But deep underground, and high above on the dark side of the moon, humanity was getting ready. They had 30 rotations, and they intended to use every single one of them. The galaxy had made a terrible mistake. It had looked at Earth and seen a small, quiet world full of soft creatures. It had not looked closely enough. It would soon wish it had.